Good afternoon. I'm Victoria Wright. I'm the Marketing and Outreach Coordinator for the Department of Procurement Service. This workshop is doing business with the City of Chicago, so that everybody's here for that workshop? Okay. Thanks for coming today. Everyone should have signed the sign-in sheet out in the hall, picked up the handouts. So the handouts for this workshop was the buying plan and the bid opportunity list. So Terry's going to go through how we use the buying plan and the bid opportunity list. I have to let you know the room is being recorded and live streamed for YouTube. All DPS workshops can now be watched on YouTube. So if you can't make it down, you can watch it live. The PowerPoint presentation can be found on our website under Events and Outreach, and you all can also print it out once you get home. The camera is basically on the presenter only, so the audience is not on camera, so people at home cannot see the audience. We do ask that you hold your questions until the end, and Terry will repeat your question and give you the answer as well. At the end of the presentation, we will end it promptly at 4:15. If there are any other questions after 4:15, we will stay in the room to answer questions. I'm going to ask that you fill out the evaluation and hand that in at the end. And I guess that's about it. So I'm going to turn it over to Terry Glavin, who is an attorney in Department of Procurement Services, and he's going to handle the rest of the workshop. Thank you for coming.
Good afternoon. Thank you for attending this afternoon's workshop. On behalf of Mayor Rahm Emanuel, as well as Commissioner Jamie Ree, the city's Chief Procurement Officer, I want to welcome you. I also want to make the next hour valuable to you, and so I'm going to try and cover a great deal of information, get into as much detail as I can within that hour. And what we're going to talk about today is doing business with the City of Chicago. Before I get into the materials, I want to give you my contact information. I want you to feel free in the future to use me as a resource for the city. You can reach out to me by email or phone. If I'm able to answer any questions you have, I'll be glad to do so. If I'm unable to do so, or if I feel there's a better resource at the city than myself to answer your questions, I will refer you to that resource. So, again, my name is Terry Glavin. My email is my name, my full name, so it's terrence@cityofchicago.org. It's terrence@cityofchicago.org. The number at my office is 312-744-0851. You can call that number and get a hold of me there. But please, feel free to use either the email or the phone number, and I'll do my best to assist you in the future. Now, you're here to learn about doing business with the City of Chicago. So what topics are we going to cover today? We're going to cover the mission of the Department of Procurement Services, the laws that govern our practice of procurement, the types of procurement and the categories that fall within the types of procurement. Now, there are separate certification workshops, which I encourage you to attend, but I'll go over certification issues a little bit. Contract monitoring, compliance. Again, there's another workshop, but I'll cover a few details about monitoring and compliance. Programs and bid incentives. I'll go over what programs and incentives are out there. If you see any that are of interest to you, you can go to a workshop on those bid incentives and workshops. Bid incentives and programs. I actually present that workshop as well. And we'll spend a little bit of time navigating the DPS website. It's a great website full of resources that vendors can use to learn about the process and to learn about opportunities with the city. So first, if you're going to do business with the City of Chicago, you're going to start by dealing with the Department of Procurement Services. So who are we? We are one of many departments at the city. but we are primarily a service department. Our job is to put contracts into place for all the other departments of the city, and they have their own mission. So they need goods, they need services to complete their goals, to fulfill their mission. So we put contracts into place because, for the most part, there have to be contracts between vendors in the city for us to make purchases. We operate our system within laws. I'll cover at a very high level what those laws are, because I think you have to get familiar with those laws to participate well in the process. But before I go into that, I want to highlight something. And mind you, this workshop, what I try to do is give some tips as we go along, so that there are some practical things you'll learn, as well as the technical side of procurement during this presentation. So one tip I want to give you is this. If you go to cityofchicago.org and you look at the menu bar at the top, there's one that is for governmental units. You drop it down and it'll list all of our departments. So if you're interested in doing business with the City of Chicago, go to that drop down bar next chance you get an opportunity online, and start looking at the different departments that are listed there. There's police department, fire department, Department of Water Management, Department of Information Technology, and the list goes on. It's worthwhile to do a little market research, right? So it's, I think, worth your time to start looking at the web pages from each department, and you can get an idea of what their mission is. Based on that mission, you can get an idea of what types of things are they going to be buying. And that might give you an idea of how to gear up for upcoming opportunities that those departments have. That leads into another tip I can give you, the purchasing plan that the city puts out. Our department reached out to all the other departments of the city and asked them for their expected buying plans for the future. And they provided information to us, and we digested that, put it into our annual buying plan. So I encourage you to get a copy of the buying plan. There's one on the table if you haven't gotten it already, outside of this room. And it's not a commitment. It's not a guarantee that those are all the items that'll be bought, but it's a good piece of research, of intelligence, if you will, of what the city might buy, and it might help you gear up and prepare for upcoming opportunities. Also, going back to that drop-down bar on the website, next to the departments, you're going to see links to sister agencies. Now, what are sister agencies? Sister agencies are separate governmental units that operate in and around the city of Chicago. So examples are Metropolitan Pier and Exposition Authority, Chicago Transit Authority. There's a list of them, and these are all separate governmental units. They have their own purchasing authority, their own rules, they have their own websites. Why do I mention it? I don't mention it because it's necessarily involved in our workshop today, but a practical tip is don't miss out on opportunities of other governmental units by thinking that all the opportunities are going to be found on our website or in our advertisements in the paper. They have their own purchasing departments with their own information. I encourage you to go to their websites as well. Make sure you're taking advantage of all the opportunities, not only at the City of Chicago, but also at city sister agencies. I mentioned that our procurement process is governed by law. We want to have reliable procurement process. We want to have integrity in our system, and so we follow procurement law. For the most part, the umbrella or skeleton of procurement law is framed or created by the Illinois Municipal Purchasing Act for over 500,000 people, and that's the state statute that governs our procurement process. But then, within that framework, we have more detail created by the Chicago Municipal Code. And that section is 2-92. What is the general theme, if you will, of the Illinois Municipal Purchasing Act? It's, for the most part, contracts are awarded by competition. Now, for goods, commodities, certain types of work services, it's competitive bidding. Basically, the lowest responsible bidder gets the award of contracts. Okay. If there's federal dollars involved, there may be federal law that we have to follow. Am I telling you all this because you have to go out today and learn every statute that may apply, that you have to learn every single section of municipal code by heart, to be able to repeat it from memory? No. But it's a competition, right? And there are rules to the competition. And in any competition, becoming a student of the game, I think, is beneficial. It makes you a better competitor, and arguably, at the very least, gives you an even playing field with other vendors that are competing. If not, it may perhaps give you even a competitive advantage. So start becoming familiar with the rules as you go along. It'll benefit you in the future. It also benefits the city. And why is that? Because the theory behind competitive bidding is that when bidders compete, especially through sealed bidding, it will arguably result in lower prices, right? The vendors will come up with their best price to compete with. And so the city wants a good pool of vendors, wants everyone to participate, and wants good competitors because it allows us to get better pricing. So it helps everybody. It helps the vendor community, and it helps the city of Chicago. In addition to learning the rules, it's good to learn how we organize our procurement process and start talking our language a little bit, right? Because even in your industries, you probably speak your own language, right? And over time, you sometimes realize, or you forget that others don't even speak your language. So what I try to do is I try to remind vendors, we have a language. We try to make the process as simple as we can within the rules, but there are categories, there are terms, and it's good to start learning those terms and categories. So when we're going to buy, let's start with the broadest type of categories. When we buy either goods or services. Sometimes our purchase involves both together. An example might be in information technology. The Department of Innovation and Technology of the city might, for example, need an enterprise system, need software developers to develop that system, but then that service has to be supplemented by the hardware, the computers that actually receive and operate the software, or help the software operate. So you can see there can be hardware in the form of computers, there can be services in the form of software writing. Sometimes goods and services come together. But for the most part, goods and services are treated as two categories. Now when we're going to put out an opportunity to you, we're going to put it into a category. If our total purchase under a certain contract is going to be under $100,000, we label it a small order. And there's a certain process by law, a little more flexible of a process by law that we follow for small orders. If it's above $100,000, there are slightly stricter standards for how we put that opportunity out for advertisement and solicitation. And I'll describe that process as well. Those are large orders, or maybe you call them normal orders. If we are not going to be buying goods, if we're going to be buying services, there are a couple types of process we might follow. We might follow an RFP, request for proposal process. We might follow an RFQ, request for qualification process. And lastly, if we're looking for construction services for small to medium-sized projects, we might follow what's called a JOC, or job order contract process. I'll say it right now, the JOC process is the subject of its own workshop, so I'm not going to go into a great amount of detail, but I'll talk about it a little bit. Is anyone here in the construction industry? No. Okay, so I will try to keep it brief for the folks that are watching online while this is streaming, but there is a separate workshop for JOC. So mostly what we're going to cover are the first 4 topics that are listed here. So, small orders. I mentioned that they are competitive bids for projects under $100,000. There's no formal bid specification or public advertisement required. In other words, we don't have to, for example, put this in the Chicago Sun-Times in the classified ad section of the advertisement. The law allows us to solicit quotes from vendors by telephone, fax, written quotation. But one thing that's worth noting is we offer the opportunity to MBE and WBE certified firms first. If there's not an MBE, WBE firm that is available for the opportunity, then we can generally go out to the broader vendor community. But if the contract's worth over $10,000, but less than $100,000, MBEWBE compliance will apply. Now I've said MBEW apply. In other words, compliance will be required. Now, if you're not familiar with doing business with the City of Chicago, you might be hearing these acronyms MBEWBE that I'm throwing around, and you might not understand it all. And when I say MBEWBE compliance might be required, you might not understand what compliance in that context even means. So I'm going to take a step to the side and just talk briefly about certification and compliance. Again, there are separate workshops for certification and compliance, but I'll give you a very high-level overview of what it's about. There are categories of certification for historically disadvantaged groups. Individuals and businesses that historically have been disenfranchised or disadvantaged in competing for contracts. The categories include MBE, Minority Business Enterprise, WBE, Women-Owned Business Enterprise. There are DBE, that's Disadvantaged Business Enterprise. That's sort of an umbrella that catches both MBE and WBE businesses at the federal level, and there's federal dollars involved. DBE covers MBE and WBE. There's ACDBE, that's Airport Concession Disadvantaged Business Enterprise. You smile, you didn't think I could say it all. But it is for vendors that are certified that want to do business at the airport. And then there's also bid incentives for business enterprises owned by people with disabilities, BEPE. So there are a number of certifications. And what has occurred is there is an ordinance that set up goals for participation. And for example, by ordinance, MBEs and WBEs should be utilized as subcontractors on city contracts. And by ordinance, the goals are 25% participation by MBEs and 5% participation by WBEs. What does that mean? Let's say there's a $100,000 contract and a non-certified firm wins that contract, and there are those goals inside that contract. And when I say inside that contract, those are now contract requirements. Then that prime contractor has to hire an MBE and allow that MBE to perform at least 25% of the work, real work on that contract, and receive 25% of the proceeds in exchange for that work. So on that $100,000 contract, $25,000 will flow through to the MBE subcontractor in order to meet contract compliance. WBE, by contract, 5% participation. So 5% of the real work will be performed by the WBE in exchange for $5,000 or 5% of the $100,000 contract. Now mind you, contracts can vary in size from less than $100,000 to millions of dollars. And those percentages remain the same, but the payout or the amount of work will adjust accordingly. So it can be substantial work to an MBE or WBE firm. So that's how compliance generally can work. Now, what is the difference between a small order and a large order or regular order? Well, a normal bid solicitation over $100,000 will be advertised by law. The paper we have for advertisement is the Chicago Sun-Times. And you'll look in the classified section for the opportunity. And in the classified section, you'll see sort of a grid of little ads that are taken out. And we're in the same section with other governmental units. So you'll see City of Chicago next to Metro opportunities, next to CTA opportunities. Remember I said sister agencies? So you'll see all our sister agency opportunities next to our advertisements in the classified ad section. You'll also be able to find the opportunity at the cityofchicago.org website, cityofchicago.org/procurement. You can come down to the bid and bond room and pick up hard copies of the opportunities. Keep in mind that the solicitation period lasts typically 10 to 30 calendar days. And keep in mind that a bid deposit might be required for some bids. Now, when you see an opportunity online or you see an opportunity in the newspaper, what do? Right? You read that ad, and it doesn't give you all the details. It gives you enough detail to inform you that there's an opportunity out there, what it's generally about. For example, it might say, City of Chicago for the police department wishes to purchase police cars. And does it tell you all the details of what the police cars have to be, what make, model, size, how many doors? No. It just tells you that we're buying police cars. But if you sell police cars or you sell motor vehicles of a close variety, it'll spark your interest. And so you'll come down to the bid and bond room and you will get a bid package. That bid package will contain specifications. Specifications are written details about what the opportunity is and what the contract's going to require of you if you win. It specifies what it is we want. Between the time that we put the opportunity out there and the time you pick up, between the time we put the opportunity out there and the time you submit your bid, it's sort of a pre-bid period. There are a couple things that may happen. There may be a pre-bid conference. Now, it's optional. We don't have to have it, but it allows you as the vendor to review the specifications, come in and ask questions, and our department will answer questions. If we need to provide clarification, then we might issue a clarification to all the vendors in writing, explaining what it is that maybe is a little vague in the specifications for the vendors. If the questions rise to a level where we actually realize, wait a minute, our specification needs to be changed, we may put out an addenda for addendum. If you see an addendum, keep in mind, you have to acknowledge that addendum when you submit your bid because it changes the specification. And I'll explain later why I mentioned that and why it's important that you acknowledge addenda and that you read follow-up addenda as they're issued. Questions, answers. So the pre-bid conference is your opportunity to really make sure that you know what you're getting into as a vendor, or that at the very least you know what it is we want when you're bidding. There also might be a site inspection. If, for example, there's services being offered in the field, or there's going to be a construction site, there might be a field inspection where you as a vendor will go out and actually view the area that you'll be working on. So you know, again, that it's something that you want to get into. But the main point I want to drive home here is review the specifications, read every word. Where it says you must do something, keep in mind that it's not maybe, you must do it that way. Wherever the document says that when you submit your bid you have to sign here, or initial there, or a certain form has to be filled out and submitted with your bid. All those things have to be done. And the reason is remember I said earlier, I said by law, competitive bids go to the lowest responsible bidder. That's the law. And what that means is 3 requirements, at the very least, are going to be met. One is you're going to be responsible. Okay, responsible means you're presently capable of performing the project. You have the equipment, you have the personnel, you have the experience. You're presently, when the time of bid, you are presently capable to deliver that contract. You don't have to gear up for it. You have no, it's not a situation where you have no inventory, no equipment, nothing, and you bid hoping to get it, and then you're going to figure out a way to perform the contract. No, you have to be presently capable of performing the contract. Responsiveness means you have to give us what we want the way we want it. And that includes the documents that are included in your bid. So if we say you have to have the signature of the president of your company on your bid in order for us to acknowledge it, it can't be a vice president in charge of sales. It has to be the president of the company. If an addenda was issued, and there's a space on the addenda for your initials to acknowledge it, and it says you must initial each addenda and submit it with your bid so we know you saw it. If you submit it and it's not initialed, technically we may have to reject your bid as being not responsive. So cross your T's, dot your I's. And the reason I say that is not because we want to penalize any vendors that are interested in doing business with us, but it's because integrity of the system requires us to treat everyone the same. And where do you draw the line, right? When you have requirements, you have to enforce them so that there's integrity in the system. So cross your T's, dot your I's, so that you don't spend all that time and energy developing your bid. You're the lowest bidder, and you don't get it because there's some technical flaw in your bid. That's a shame for you. It's a shame for us because then we lose the lowest bid where we could save money, and we have to go to the next lowest bidder, which is a higher price. So it's a shame for everybody when that occurs. And this is really just a summary of some of the things, but make sure you fill out all the required information. Certain bid documents must be submitted and executed with the bid. If not, it'll be rejected. Sign the documents. And again, don't forget to get your signature notarized so that we can receive your bid. Also, some bids may require a bid deposit. It could be 5% of the bid as an amount. Bid deposits you will get back, but it might be required. We don't accept cash, but there are other forms and you can read the bid documents to determine what type of bid deposits we will receive. If there's an extremely large project, and I'm talking about typically very large construction projects, we may require a bid fee, which you don't get back. That's used to offset some of the costs of reviewing all these bids. Some projects are very extensive, take a lot of time and human resources from the city to evaluate, so we charge a bid fee. Finally, keep in mind, bids must be submitted by a certain time. It'll say it in your specifications. Please don't be a minute late, because that could be a basis for rejecting your bid. So if it says 11 o'clock a.m., you must submit your sealed bid, submit it at that time. Now, what happens when you have submitted your bid? There's literally going to be a bid opening. Monday through Friday, except holidays, we open bids at 11 a.m. So when you drop off that bid and 11 a.m. comes around, we literally open and read the bids aloud. It's here in the bid and bond room. Bids are tabulated, and we do our best to get bids tabulated and posted online, so you can actually see the bids online for a given project. Now, the tabulation being posted doesn't necessarily mean contract award. We still have to review to make sure all the bids are responsive and responsible. So we go through that process. We make sure we get the recommendation of award from the department that's going to be making the purchases, make sure they're on board. And we have to go through the process of having the mayor, comptroller, getting all the proper signatures to make that a complete contract. But as a practical matter, keep in mind, that bid you submit, that's actually the contract. So if you get the contract award, that's what your bid is, what the mayor signs, what the comptroller signs, and that ultimately ends up becoming the contract. So again, you don't ever enter any contract, right, without having read it. So again, I can't overemphasize, read the specifications before you bid very carefully. At the end of the day, you did your homework, came up with your lowest price, the contract will be awarded to the lowest responsible bidder. And at that point, we get to hand you off to the department that wants to make the purchases. And from that point forward, it's more like the private sector than not. You now have a client. You have a business relationship. You have a contract. And you're going to be getting requests not from us for work. The department is going to be sending you requests for work in accordance with the contract that you were awarded. When you receive those orders, it's no different than your relationship you have in the private sector. You're going to, I would think, perform the work. When you perform the work, whether it's delivering goods, delivering services, if they are accepted by the department, they're satisfied with what you delivered, then you invoice the department directly. When the department receives your invoice, they're going to internally check that invoice. You realize that every department has so much work going on. They will take a little bit of time, but they'll accept your invoice, check it, make sure the work was actually done with your invoice, make sure that it was acceptable. And if it was, then they'll forward that invoice to the comptroller, and the comptroller will issue payment to you. So you can see, once you have a city contract, it's not much different from doing business with a private client. We pretty much stay out of it until the contract lives its life. The contract might have be 1 year in length, it might be 2 years in length. And when it runs its course, we'll come back into the picture and do the process all over again so that other vendors get the opportunity. We might get involved while the contract's alive for a couple reasons. Let's say, for example, you thought you delivered the way you were supposed to, and the department is saying, it's not in accordance with the contract. It's not the way we wanted it. Well, you can reach out to us, and you can try to get us to resolve payment disputes. On the flip side, the department can also send us a request, a memo, and say, we've been placing orders, and this vendor never returns our calls. Or we've been placing orders, they delivered, but they delivered nothing in accordance with the contract. In which case, we will send a letter to you and ask you to respond. So we do get involved in disputes between departments and vendors. We also get involved in protests. So let's say, for example, you bid on a project. You thought you were the lowest bidder. You thought you were responsible. But let's say we rejected your bid for some technicality. And you thought, wait, that's wrong. You could file a bid protest with us and fight the award of the contract to someone else. We will review it and make a decision on your protest. So we do get involved at a few stages in the contracting process, but for the most part, you're doing business with the city once you get that contract award. And at that point on, we actually hope you just have a good business relationship, and we have minimal involvement from that point forward. Now, what happens if we're not buying goods? Let's just say we're buying services. Services are broken down into broken down into two types of categories: professional services and work services. Professional services by statute are services that are of a highly skilled nature and therefore are not adaptive to competitive bidding. So we award professional services contracts on more of a balance of value with price. And the process is not as simple as going to the lowest responsible bidder, and I'll explain. Now, a second category of service is work service. Work service, while extremely important to the city of Chicago, is not considered by law to be as highly skilled. So, an example, or a couple examples: landscaping, security guard services. Those are two examples of extremely valuable services to the city of Chicago, but they are not considered by law to be highly skilled. To the level of requiring RFP process to be used. As long as vendors show they have work experience, that they have any necessary licenses that they need to perform that work, beyond those qualifications of licensing and experience, there are a number of vendors that perform those services, and the law allows those to be competitively bid. So those go to the lowest responsible bidder. But if the skills rise to the level of professional services like accounting, certain healthcare services, information technology development, those are examples where you don't, and in your personal life, I'm sure you could attest to this, you don't just go to the lowest price vendor, right? Healthcare is a good example. You don't just go to the lowest price healthcare provider. You like to try to live within your budget, but at the same time you try to balance it with good service, and somewhere you find the best physician or healthcare provider for you. Well, professional services for the city are not much different. There are certain services where we just can't go to the lowest price provider, because we can't risk certain systems breaking down or our inability to operate as a government. So we have to balance value and price. So we go through the RFP process if we're looking to award one agreement with a professional service provider. We advertise the same way for RFPs. But when we are asking for vendors to respond, we're not asking necessarily for a bid, we're asking for them for a proposal. The proposal is a written document, a persuasive document telling us why they're the best vendor to perform on the opportunities available. Pricing is part of the evaluation process, but it's not the only factor in us awarding an agreement to a vendor. RFPs are typically used when we don't have the expertise in-house or the resources, and we need to go to an outside vendor to supplement our resources. An RFP will define what the project is, but doesn't give you all the details of how the project will be implemented. Because we actually look to the vendor to talk to us about how they're going to approach it based on their skill set. And they come and we evaluate them based on that proposal. So based on their written proposal, also based on in-person meetings where the vendors meet with evaluation committees formed within the city. Based on the writing in those meetings, vendors are scored. Those scores are compared, and based on the comparison of those scores, an agreement is awarded to the highest ranked vendor. Now what happens if we have ongoing work? We don't know all the details of each project immediately, but we can't wait till the last minute to have contracts in place for a variety of reasons. So we need a pool of vendors that are pre-qualified at the ready to take on projects as they come due. Then if we need a pool of vendors for professional services, we follow an RFQ process, request for qualifications. The process starts the same. We advertise the same way as we do for other projects. But instead of asking for proposals, we're asking for vendors to submit their qualifications. It's basically like asking you to submit your corporate resume. Now, when you submit your corporate resume, it could be quite brief if it's a simple type of work. If it's a very extensive, complicated project, it could be binders and binders of qualifications. For example, let's say we want to build out with information technology, let's say we want to build out an enterprise data system that allows all the departments of the city to communicate with each other. It has to have a large deal of memory, it has to have a great deal of functionality. Do we want to have a IT student that just graduated and this is going to be his first project where he's going to cut his teeth, just started a small company? Or do we need a vendor that has done projects for Los Angeles, New York, major city? So the idea is we're going to be looking for vendors on some projects to show where they've worked, what kind of projects they've worked on that are similar, who are their key personnel, what's their background, both education and experience. And so your qualifications can be binders and binders. But at the end of the day, we're going to bring you in the same way as with an RFP. You're going to meet with an evaluation committee, and you're going to be scored. But unlike the RFP process where you will be eliminated if your score is less than another vendor, there are a pool of vendors that if they meet the qualifications, they will be pre-qualified, put in a pool, and they will sit. And they will sit until projects come around. An example I tend to use is, let's say, construction engineers that focus on road work. So let's say Chicago Department of Transportation needs to redo roads in Chicago. And the road, I think that's the best example, is Milwaukee Avenue. Milwaukee Avenue starts in the center of the city and goes all the way, I think it goes all the way to Wisconsin. But at the end of the day, it does go to the end of the city. And what do you know about Milwaukee Avenue? By the time you fix that street, you probably got to start at the beginning and start working on it again. So we know there's going to be work, but we don't always know when the project's going to be needed. We don't know when the funding is necessarily going to be there. There's a lot of reasons why you don't know exactly what the project's going to be or when it's going to be. But when you know you can do it, you want to get it done. So we have pools, for example, of construction engineers that work hand in hand with construction companies on road work. And we have a pool of vendors like that. And when we have a project on a certain section of road that comes due, what do? We go out to the pool and we say, here's a project. Finally, here are the fine details of a project. Are you interested? Yes. And we negotiate pricing. And a task order is awarded to the vendor that is suited for the project and that has been pre-qualified. We don't go outside the pool. We stay in that pool and give it to one vendor, maybe multiple vendors depending on the work. And that task order is like a mini contract with the details of that project. It's within the general scope of the master consulting agreement that the vendor got as a result of being pre-qualified. But it's a mini contract within the master consulting agreement. They perform that contract, they invoice CDOT or whatever department they have the task order with, and when they're done, they go back in the pool. And then they sit and wait and hope that another project comes around. There's the possibility that no work can be awarded as a result of a master consulting agreement. On the other hand, there can be a great amount of work that results. It just depends on the master consulting agreement and the timing. But at the end of the day, this master consultant agreement is awarded as a result of an RFQ. You get a task order within your master consulting agreement. You perform the work, you hope to get more task orders. And that's how the RFQ process works. No one here said they were in construction. Does that change? Okay, we have one member who is in construction. Job order contracting. Are you familiar with Jack? No. Okay. Job order contracting, briefly, is a way to solicit work for small to medium-sized construction projects. At one point in time, it was determined that construction projects could be broken down into common tasks. A price book was created where prices were attached to those certain tasks, and then vendors are allowed to bid or compete for those tasks, or like bidding on tasks individually that make up an entire construction project, and they bid on those tasks by bidding a discount off of the price book. But at the end of the day, it's competition based on pricing tasks that make up a project. If you're interested in that, there is a separate workshop taught by our deputy over construction, Byron Whitaker, and I encourage you to attend that workshop for more detail. And also, I'll stick around if you have any questions. I can answer specific questions in the meantime, but I encourage you to go to that workshop. As for workshops in general, they are listed outside of the bid and bond room on a workshop schedule on the wall. There's also handouts here. All our workshops, and there are a lot of them, are offered on a monthly basis, and then also they're streamed online as this workshop is right now. So I encourage you to follow up online or with the workshop schedule outside our office. And you can also see our workshop schedule at our department webpage at cityofchicago.org/procurement. I'll give you a quick second to eyeball the JOC information, but I think we only have one member of the audience that is interested in JOC, so I'll stick around afterward for any questions. I've covered certification, but I wanted you just to see the categories and give you a second. Again, separate workshop. We have a workshop about how to become certified, and then also once you get your certification, how to take advantage of it. So a couple tips. I said earlier I like to give tips during this practical workshop. One tip is if you believe that you're eligible to be certified, don't wait until you see your first opportunity to start, because the certification process does take a little bit of time, and you don't have to have an opportunity in mind in order to start the certification process. So if you believe you're eligible for any of the categories of certification, get started now, start the forms. Also, whenever you do business as a prime contractor with the City of Chicago, we require what's called an online economic disclosure statement. It's a form that tells us a little bit about who you are, who your company are, so that we know who we're doing business with. So we know we're doing business with those that we can do business with. There's no conflicts, that they haven't been debarred for some type of past criminal act or fraudulent act. So it's a way for us to make sure city dollars are flowing the through to those that deserve to do business with the City of Chicago. So get certification process started and also get your online EDS started if you believe you're going to be doing business with us. Contract monitoring and compliance, there is a separate workshop on this, but keep in mind, we don't just give lip service to MBE WBE certification. It is a requirement in certain of our contracts, and it's a goal by ordinance, and we monitor it. We monitor payments that are made to subcontractors, including MBEs and WBEs. We have a system. Prime vendors are required to report payments made to MBEs and WBEs to the city, and we do audit and monitor to make sure that the participation is being fulfilled, or the requirements are being met, and that the participation is real. Our department even does site inspections to make sure that anything being claimed is being done. We also follow up on Chicago City residents ordinance requirements being met and equal opportunity employment requirements being met. It is the law, so we're not trying to make it tough. We're making sure our system has integrity. Ways to achieve compliance. I've talked about a few, but Prime can be an MBE or WBE itself and get credit, or a DBE. You can joint venture. If you're a smaller MBE or WBE and you don't have the capacity, remember I said you have to be presently capable. You might not be presently capable alone, but you can joint venture with other firms and create capacity by joining forces and fulfilling contract requirements. You can subcontract a portion of the work to certified firms. And you can also purchase materials from firms that are MBEs and WBEs. Lastly, with exceptions, you can also have indirect participation be counted. And that's where, for example, you might not be utilizing MBEs and WBEs on the exact work of the contract you have, but you might use MBE, WBE certified firms for off-contract needs, like on your private contracts, you use them as subcontractors, and they're making money off of your private contracts. So they are benefiting off the city certification, and there are situations where that participation indirectly can benefit the prime contractor towards their compliance requirements. Again, we do monitor. Monthly subcontracting payments are monitored. Certification forms are reviewed. We look at weekly certified payrolls, and we look at waivers as well. I'm not going to cover a whole lot of detail on this next topic because I teach a workshop on these programs and incentives in detail. But take a chance to look at these programs and incentives. If you feel like one may apply to you or your business, I encourage you to attend my other workshop for programs and bid incentives. In case you can't see the details, the programs include Small Business Initiative for construction, Diversity Credit Program, Mentor Protege Program, bid incentives for small businesses, veteran-owned businesses, business enterprises owned by people with disabilities, city-based manufacturers, city-based businesses, companies that have apprentice utilization, and companies that use alternatively powered vehicles. So there are programs and incentives for these categories. If any of these sound like they might work for you, please attend my other workshop on programs and bid incentives. Okay. Now, I have talked about a number of programs, incentives, types of procurement, our process, the law. There's information on our website, though, where you can help yourself. And we've done our best to give you as much information that we can on our procurement website. So what I encourage you to do is, when you're done today, and if you don't have questions, I said earlier, you can reach out to me by email or phone. But if you don't have questions, but you still have curiosity, go to cityofchicago.org/procurement and look at our website. And just wander around. It's one of the best ways that you can learn. You can see awarded contracts and modifications. You can look and see payments that have been made to other vendors on existing and past contracts. You can see bid tabulations on contracts that have been solicited, or opportunities that have been advertised. You can see weekly bid opportunities. You can search for MBEs and WBEs in our directory. You can see bid incentives that are out there, regulations, and it's all at our webpage. A few screenshots I've included so you can see. If you go to our DPS website, you're going to go to /procurement. There's an icon. It's almost at the top of the page. It's toward the middle, and it says awarded contracts. Click on that icon, and it's going to take you to a second window. And that second window will offer you City of Chicago. I think the other options are Park District, maybe one other governmental entity. It's set by default to City of Chicago, so all you got to do is press awarded contracts, get to that window, press continue, and it'll take you to this search database. You can search for vendor information, contracts, awards, disclosures. Basically what I'm telling you is you have the opportunity by going to the database to see what type of contracts we put in place. You can see from the past and currently existing contracts that show what the terms and conditions are that you would be expected to live by if you were to do business with the city. You can see what vendors have contracts. Why is that important? Because those are the vendors that oftentimes will compete the next go around. Maybe you're not a prime contractor. Maybe either you're not ready or you don't want to be a prime contractor. Maybe you're looking for subcontract opportunities. Maybe you're a certified firm, MBE, WBE, DBE, ACBBE, BEPD, and you want to find out what prime contractors might be looking for subs. You can go and see what vendors are active with the City of Chicago and start networking with those vendors. There's a wealth of information in this database, and I encourage you to utilize it and do some market research for yourself. When you get to the awarded contract database, you can see also that you can search by vendor name. If you know a vendor in your field, maybe you want to see if they have city contracts so you can network or participate with them. If you know of a contract that exists but you don't know who's on it, but you're interested in seeing it, you can search by purchase order number, department name. There's even a field for project description. So you can play around with the search fields and find pretty much anything you're looking for. Side note, I said purchase order number. Remember I said also start learning the language of the city and procurement services? It's very helpful whenever you're talking to us, when you're looking at opportunities, when you're just even tracking your own business affairs of the city. Specification numbers are assigned to every project, even before contract award. So always try to get familiar with the specification number for any opportunity you have or that you're interested in. It's easiest, for example, if you have a question, to call the city, call the Department of Procurement Services, and say, I have a question about a certain project. If you can just right off the bat say, it's specification number X, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's going to be the fastest route to get to the person that is most knowledgeable about the project. When a contract is awarded and executed, it's assigned a PO number, purchase order number, and then that second number follows that project through the rest of its life. So specification number is the best number to know. Purchase order number would be the second best number to know if you're going to be talking about projects with the City of Chicago. And it shows by this web page because it's one of the, those are the two of the options you have for searching for projects online. You can also look up modifications, amendments. You can see how contracts change over time during their life through modifications and amendments. You can also look up and see, as I said, payments. So if you're curious to see if certain vendors are getting paid on their contracts, when they got paid, how much, you can look up payments as well. This is the bid tabulation search, so you can see the bid tabulations. And lastly, it's not on the PowerPoint, but you can also look up vendors' economic disclosure statements. So if you're curious about vendors that are doing business in the City of Chicago, it's another example of transparency in city business, and that is by far one of the primary goals. In addition to efficiencies and responsiveness and integrity, transparency is one of the keys in many of the updates and resources that we put out on the web and at these workshops. So that is the DPS website, and it's very very helpful, has a lot of information. I encourage you to go there. Lastly, before we start question and answers, we are very active in social media. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. Keep in touch with us. Reach out to us online through those avenues, and it's a great way for you to get constant updates about what Department of Procurement Services is doing and what opportunities may be available to you in the form of business, as well as ongoing learning experiences about the procurement process. So having said that, I want to thank you for visiting the bid and bond room and spending time with me during this workshop. And what I will do now is open up the session, if there are any, to questions and answers. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Well, I'll stick around regardless in case anyone has any questions that they think of. But otherwise, I appreciate your time. Look forward to seeing you in the future at more workshops. And I hope you have a great day. Thank you.